Beginner's first writing, Fan Chu thought his life would always be ordinary, but unexpectedly, a tour group he joined by chance took them into a strange world. Frequent paranormal events. How many people can survive when the bus takes everyone back and forth time and time again? PS 1. Each world will release 3 runes, and each person may not receive the same one too. Not Shuangwen, ordinary infinite flow supernatural text 3. There will be some emotional scenes, not too many keywords of the novel. To be the king of Go in the survival game without pop-ups, to be the king of Go in the survival game. Download the complete text, and to read the latest chapters of the King of Go in the survival game. Chapter 1. Dreams. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Dreams. In the quiet space, Fan Chu was running desperately, accompanied by heavy breathing and a beating heart. Fan Chu saw the front door of a shop open in front of him, and instinctively ran in. The shop was very small, and everything was almost at a glance. Fan Chu kept turning his head to look outside the door, feeling anxious, and then looked around to find a place to hide. Dida, Dida, the sound of water dripping echoed in my ears. Fan Chu's heart suddenly stopped, and under hesitation, he hid in the freezer. As soon as she entered the freezer, Fan Chu felt a cold surge, and time gradually passed. She felt so frozen that she couldn't hear the sound outside clearly. As time passed, Fan Chu felt her body getting colder and colder. The cold made Fan Chu's body tremble incessantly, but she dared not go out. Dida, Dida, Fan Chu heard the sound again. Fan Chu, who had been frozen to the point where his brain was slow to function, was startled and his expression became frightened, with a faint sense that his voice was getting closer and closer to her. Dida, Dida, this time it seems to be ringing in Fan Chu's ear. Dida, Dida, something dripped onto Fan Chu's face. Fan Chu instinctively looked up, and what caught his eye was a face full of twisted faces, as if smiling at her, but his eyes were fixed on Fan Chu curled up in the freezer. A beautiful piece of music sounded, and Fan Chu woke up from bed in shock. She looked at her phone, turned off the alarm, and lay in bed as if relieved of her burden. It's a dream. At this moment, the phone came, and as soon as Fan Chu answered the call, his friend across from him urged him. At first, haven't you woken up yet? We're all downstairs at your house. Fan Chu thought that today was their first time gathering after work and they had arranged to join a tour group. Thinking this way, Fan Chu quickly got up from bed and responded to the phone. It's coming soon, you guys are waiting for me. After finishing speaking, I hung up the phone and went to wash up and change clothes. Downstairs, 3 people squatting at the entrance of the community, bored and bored. At this moment, a fair-skinned and cold-looking girl came from afar, with a pair of willow leaf eyes smiling as she looked at the 3 squatting girls. Yang Mei stood up first and complained to Fan Chu. Take a look at what time it is. It's useless for the 3 of us to wait for you under the big sun, but you're still sleeping in. When it came to sleeping, Fan Chu remembered that dream and his face turned pale. Shuangwen noticed Fan Chu's expression and signaled Yang Mei to stop talking. Yang Mei only then noticed that Fan Chu's face was particularly pale today, and she asked with concern. Xiao Chu, why is your complexion so bad? Bai Miao Miao also looked at her with concern. Fan Chu waved his hand to the 3 of them. It's okay, let's quickly gather at the tourist agency. Their car should be leaving soon. As they spoke, the 4 of them hurriedly took a taxi to the other side. At the entrance of the tourism agency, many cars stopped, and rows of buses parked at the entrance were quite spectacular, with several buses mixed inside. Yang Mei poked Bai Miao Miao beside her and jokingly said. Does this travel agency have so many people going out at once? Are there not enough buses over there to make up for the number? Bai Miao Miao beside her shook her head, gesturing for them to get on the car quickly. After the 4 people greeted the tour guide, they were asked to take the bus over there. The 4 of them wanted to say something, but the tour guide was busy and ignored them, so everyone had to give up. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Departure. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Departure. As soon as the four of them sat down, Shuangwen next to Fan Chu greeted the three of them. Look over there, that boy, take a good look. I didn't expect to sit so close to the handsome guy in my lifetime. Shuangwen stared at Jing Ku over there with a seductive expression on her face. Fan Chu also looked over, and the fine sunlight scattered on the outline of the young man. The already gentle temperament seemed to have been coated with a halo for him. Bai Miao Miao looked at Fan Chu. At the beginning, we were one of the school beauties in the school. If it weren't for her unwillingness to let us share her photos in the next round of selection, we wouldn't have been dominated by those who didn't look as good as our early classmates. Fan Chu gave them a displeased glance. Alright, we've already started working, you're still so childish. Then he said, but it does look good, it's a bit in line with my aesthetic. Yang Mei jokingly looked at Fan Chu. Then you need a contact information, Chu Chu. Fan Chu was too lazy to pay attention and closed his eyes to rest for a while. In no time, the bus set off and walked on the road. Everyone inside the bus was very excited, chatting and discussing. After walking for a while, Shuangwen beside him looked out the window in surprise. Why do I look so familiar with this section of the road? Listening to Shuangwen's words, the remaining three of them all looked out the window. Bai Miao Miao and Yang Mei were equally surprised. Really, I seem to have dreamt of this road last night, but I forgot what I dreamt of. Yang Mei waved her hand innocently. Fan Chu looked out at the increasingly familiar street scenery, feeling inexplicably uneasy. She suddenly saw a shop in front of her, her pupils contracted, and pointed to the shop in front, saying, I also dreamed about the store in front of me. The three of them looked over there and felt a bit familiar. At this moment, the person next to them heard the conversation of the four of them and curiously approached to inquire. What are you talking about? I feel flustered when I listen. The three of them started chatting with those people. The bus was getting closer and closer to the store. Fan Chu clearly saw the scene of the store, which was exactly the same as her dream yesterday, and there was no one in the store. Fan Chu felt something was wrong. She looked out the window and saw that it was daylight, but there was no one on the street. She carefully looked at every shop on the street, some with their doors tightly closed, while others seemed to have been abandoned for a long time. Abandoned. Fan Chu felt that this description was very abnormal. A second-tier city should not be described as a deserted street. She remembered the dream from last night, and all the details in the dream seemed to gradually become clear under the scenery of this street, as if every blade of grass and every tree could correspond. Fan Chu's hair stood on end as she grabbed Shuangwen's hand beside her. Shuangwen was chatting happily with the person next to her, feeling a pair of cold hands holding her. She turned her head to look at Fan Chu. What's wrong, Xiao Chu? Your complexion is getting worse and worse. Are you feeling motion sickness? The other two roommates next to him also stopped talking to others and looked at Fan Chu with a worried expression. Fan Chu's already fair face turned even paler, which was originally a bad thing, but unfortunately, because Fan Chu's appearance had a hint of pitiful charm. The boy next to him noticed and began to pay great attention. At this moment, a pair of fair and slender hands reached out to Fan Chu. I have motion sickness medicine here. Fan Chu looked up and saw Jing Ku's somewhat calm expression. He reached out to take his medicine. Thank you. Before leaving, Ku seemed to want to say something, but he paused as he watched his roommates gossiping around Fan Chu. After Jing Ku left, the three roommates looked at Fan Chu with a sinister expression on their faces. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Disappearing Drivers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Disappearing Drivers. Fan Chu rolled his eyes at them, then remembered the dream and the scene she had just seen, and solemnly asked them to approach. My roommate Shuangwen asked with some confusion, "What's wrong, Xiao Chu?" Fan Chu spoke with a serious expression on his face. "What I'm saying next may deviate a bit from reality, but I hope you can believe me." After finishing speaking, I stared seriously into the eyes of the three of them. Although my roommates didn't know what had happened, they still nodded firmly. Fan Chu spoke slowly. "It's like this, I had a nightmare last night. In the dream, I was desperately escaping on this street. I don't know what I was afraid of, but I had a vague idea in my heart that being caught up by something behind me might lead to something bad." Fan Chu finished speaking and looked out the window. "The shop I just passed by was my last hiding place. In my dream, I was still found. Before I woke up, I saw a monster with many disgusting faces piled together. They stared at me fiercely, and then I woke up." Fan Chu still felt very scared in her heart, looking out the window with some unease. The three roommates next to him fell silent after listening to what Fan Chu had said. Yang Mei spoke first. "Actually, I seem to have had some strange dreams last night, but I was woken up by my mother in the middle of the night, so I can't remember clearly after waking up." Then he looked at Bai Miao Miao and Xue Xiao. Xue Xiao hesitated to speak. "I actually saw the store that Xiao Chu mentioned in my dream, but it seems like I'm passing by. If you look at it from a different perspective, it's like looking out now." Bai Miao Miao also agreed. "I've dreamed about it before, but it doesn't seem like it's in the car." The four of them all thought it was unbelievable how such a strange thing could have happened. Later, Fan Chu said, "Look outside, there's not a single person on the road. I've observed carefully and the shops are also empty. Moreover, this area feels very backward. I don't remember such a place in our city." The three of them carefully looked outside and felt something was wrong. Bai Miao Miao murmured to herself, "How do you feel? We're getting more and more remote as we walk, and this doesn't seem like a highway." Fan Chu took out his phone and wanted to make a call, but it couldn't light up and the screen was always black. She looked at her roommates' phones with some confusion, and the other three also operated them, only to find that the phones suddenly went black. The four of them looked at each other and suddenly realized something was wrong. What did Yang Mei think of? She ran ahead and found that there was no one above the driver's seat. What about the driver? She turned pale and shouted loudly. Where did the driver go? When everyone heard the shout, they all stood up and looked over to see that there was no one above the driver's seat. At this moment, the bus was still slowly moving forward, and the silence inside the carriage was terrifying. One timid middle-aged woman said, "Without a driver, why is this bus still running?" The other man seemed to remember something and said weakly, "It seems that when I got on the car, I didn't see the driver. Later on, all I saw was everyone getting on one after another, and then the car drove away. I always thought the driver got on when I wasn't paying attention, so I slept all the way." Some people look back and find that the bus that has been following them is also missing, causing a group of people to panic. The whole bus was filled with cries and curses. One of the boys with a flamboyant red hair picked up his phone and smashed it into the window, but no matter how hard he smashed it, the car window was incredibly sturdy. A few hours later, everyone sat in despair in their respective seats. Fan Chu noticed that the waiting bus had already entered the wilderness. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Let's Escape Together 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Let's Escape Together 1. The bus suddenly stopped in an open area and the door automatically opened. Everyone noticed that the door was open and ran down eagerly. Fan Chu vaguely felt something was wrong in her heart, but she couldn't stay on this bus all the time. Fan Chu stood up and wanted to wait before getting off, but was forced to walk forward by the crowd of people rushing to get off the car. She followed the crowd and got off the car. After getting off the car, Fan Chu found that the people around her were very unfamiliar. She tried to find her roommates in the crowd, but there were too many people. People unconsciously walked back on the same path, wanting to leave this place. Fan Chu followed the crowd for a distance and turned around to find that the bus was missing. She suppressed her fear and slowly followed the people away, feeling vaguely in her heart that this matter was not the end, but rather a more terrifying beginning. Fan Chu followed the army for a long time, and on the way, they would also stop, take out some food and water from their backpacks, and sit on the ground to rest for a while. Occasionally, there may be people who complain, but they just say a few words and keep moving forward. However, for a while, the street that had just passed by the bus caught the eye. Seeing the familiar street scenery, everyone began to relax and quickly walked towards the store. Fan Chu looked at the cheerful people in front of him, then at the quiet streets around him. There was no one around, and his heart became even more eerie. He tightly pursed his lips, holding his already black screen phone in his hand, and ran towards the hidden corner. She would rather believe that last night was not a dream, but rather a warning. Some students were planning to call their families and ask them to send a car to pick them up, but they found that everyone's phones were in a black screen state. What's going on? My phone seems to be broken, I'll use your phone. I can't use my phone either. The people around heard it and picked up their phones, only to find that everyone's phones were black. The person who had just started running towards the shop hurriedly returned. It's strange, there's not a single person in the store. Everyone looked at each other in confusion. At this moment, a gust of wind blew by. A strange woman appeared in the middle of the road, her pitch-black eyes spinning around, looking at the people around her with a strange smile on her face. Her body seemed to have been soaked in water, dripping onto the ground. Dida, she slowly walked towards the nearest person, showing a smile towards them. Looking at the person's frightened gaze, the woman's smile grew bigger and bigger, and in the end, only her smile remained on her entire face. The people around noticed this scene and hurriedly fled, with screams, cries, and curses mixed in the chaotic crowd. The woman left the spot with a satisfied smile on her face. Every time a woman catches someone, she will have a twisted face on her face. Fan Chu watched the chaos outside in the dark and understood in his heart that the dream had become a reality, perhaps not just a dream. Fan Chu couldn't help but think about the worst possible outcome. Dida, listening to the sound not far away, Fan Chu felt his heart beating uncontrollably. The clear sense of fear in my dream has reappeared. I can't stay any longer. Fan Chu felt the danger. If he hides here again, the outcome will definitely be very tragic. Fan Chu avoided the broad and bright streets and walked through the dark and narrow alleys, searching everywhere for the best hiding place. Not far from here, Bai Miao Miao is facing a huge crisis. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Let's escape together too. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Let's Escape Together too. Bai Miao Miao was nearby at the time and witnessed some terrifying scenes with her own eyes. She screamed and fled like a crowd. Not long after running, Bai Miao Miao collided head-on with that woman. Looking at the extra face on her face, Bai Miao Miao's mind went blank. She panicked and ran to crowded places, relying on her instincts. After rushing into the crowd, it was a panic, but the woman seemed like a wolf entering the sheepfold, with more and more obvious marks on her hands. Bai Miao Miao's heart pounded as she listened to the fearful shouts of the crowd behind her. She only has one word in her mind: run. Bai Miao Miao casually entered a house and wanted to shout for help, but found that the house was covered in dust and there was no trace of anyone. How could it be? Bai Miao Miao's heart became increasingly flustered and her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She was about to go to the next room to take a look. Dida, she came, and Bai Miao Miao heard the sound. She hurriedly crawled under the bed, covering her mouth for fear of making any noise. Dida, the sound moved from far to near, and Bai Miao Miao could clearly feel that the woman was circling around the bed. At this moment, Bai Miao Miao's fear rose to the extreme, and she felt it difficult to breathe in her chest, tears streaming uncontrollably. Dida, Dida, the voice became quieter and she seemed to have walked away. Bai Miao Miao trembled and put down her hand, letting out a sigh of relief. Just as she was about to climb out, the woman's face was suddenly beside the bed, with dozens of pairs of eyes quietly watching her, and the smile on her face became increasingly curved. Fan Chu felt the chaos of the crowd in the distance and sighed. She discovered several excellent hiding places that had not been found in her dream. Fan Chu took turns all the way and finally struggled to hide on the suspended beam in a house. Fan Chu couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. For the past 2 days, Fan Chu relied on several hiding points to switch back and forth, changing places every now and then, successfully avoiding the terrifying woman. After hiding like this for 2 days, Fan Chu felt that it was already the limit. A few days ago, we could still hear the screams of people outside, but today it suddenly becomes peaceful. Fan Chu clearly understood in his heart that there were not many people left. Fan Chu, like a few days ago, switched locations back and forth. Just as she was getting on the suspended beam, a sound suddenly came from afar. Dida, Dida, in an instant, Fan Chu became nervous all over, feeling remorseful. He just wanted to come a few more minutes later. Fan Chu watched the woman walk in clearly from above, with water continuously dripping from her body, and her face contorted more than the previous 2 days, densely packed. Fan Chu felt that the woman's strength seemed to have increased and her movement speed had also increased. The woman tilted her head and wobbled around the room, searching for her. Her body was bent 180 degrees, and her eyes were scanning back and forth under the bed and table. Fan Chu held his breath and stared at her intently. The woman seemed to feel something, suddenly looking up at the roof and scanning around as if she had found something. Quickly rushed towards the top of the wardrobe, looking at the person with a cold gaze. Fan Chu was startled and almost thought he had been discovered, but saw the woman rushing towards another person inside the room. The woman caught a boy with a huge curve on his mouth. The boy widened his eyes in fear and stood still. He instinctively looked in the direction of Fan Chu and asked for her help. The female lead is Go Huangjia with good luck. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Let's Run Together 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Let's Run Together 3. The woman followed his gaze and noticed Fan Chu hiding on the suspended beam. With a force in her hand, the boy fell softly to the ground. Fan Chu's heart sounded an alarm, and without any complaints, he turned around and prepared to jump off the suspended beam. Dida, Dida, the voice was within reach, and Fan Chu felt a bit desperate in his heart. A cold hand had already pressed against Fan Chu's back. With a tremendous force, Fan Chu was thrown down. Fan Chu felt like his body was falling apart, and he couldn't stop the pain all over. She watched as the woman walked towards her step by step. Fan Chu quietly observed around, only to find something not far from her. She decided to take a gamble. Fan Chu endured the pain and stood up, running quickly towards the other side. The woman became even more excited when she saw that she was about to escape and chased after her. Fan Chu got that thing when the woman had already pinched her neck. Fan Chu placed it on the woman's hand, and behind her came the woman's painful and resentful roar. Disappeared. The cold air around him rebounded, and Fan Chu collapsed on the ground, saved. Fan Chu didn't expect that there would still be talismans, which could restrain women. Perhaps there would be other places, so Fan Chu stood up and searched for them. An afternoon passed, and Fan Chu only found 2 talismans, which she temporarily referred to as amulets. The figure of the woman never appeared, and Fan Chu felt very uneasy in her heart. She felt that women would not disappear so easily. Fan Chu tightly held the 2 amulets in his hand, his heart calmed down a lot. Fan Chu felt that she couldn't hide from women anymore. She could only wander in the darkness, constantly moving, praying that women wouldn't notice her. Dida, Dida, this voice rang out again beside Fan Chu. Fan Chu's heart tightened, and what should have appeared was inevitable. She ran forward with all her might. At the same time, the sound seemed to have become rapid due to Fan Chu's running. Fan Chu's heart pounded, especially in the quiet environment. The talisman in his hand was soaked in sweat, and his heart only had one thought: to live. Fan Chu felt that her body had reached its limit, and her throat was a bit fishy and sweet. She had to choose to stop. Dida, something dripped onto Fan Chu's face, and Fan Chu was wary. In the last scene of her dream, she had also experienced such a thing. Before her brain could react, Fan Chu's hand had already been raised, and a bright yellow light shone on her head. The voice in her ear disappeared. Finally, I lived again. Fan Chu collapsed on the ground, his whole body trembling uncontrollably. Then he stood up trembling and walked forward. After a while, Fan Chu saw the bus in front of him and knew it clearly. He hobbled towards the other side. A cold breath suddenly came from Fan Chu's ear, and in an instant, goosebumps all over his body. What's going on? Fan Chu was quite shocked in his heart. How could it have appeared so quickly? She ignored her physical discomfort and ran away, hearing the familiar voice coming from behind. Dida, in an instant, Fan Chu had already been grabbed by the woman's shoulder, with a cold breath rolling all over his body. His shoulder was pinched and it was hurting more and more. Fan Chu felt that the woman wanted to pull down her entire arm holding the talisman. Fan Chu exerted all his strength and held the talisman in his other hand. Ignoring the pain of his arm displacement, he turned back and pressed it against the woman's body. Fan Chu immediately ran towards the car, and the woman behind her let out a sharp cry and ran towards her. Fan Chu couldn't look back and was amazed that the effect of the talisman was getting smaller and smaller. At the last moment of being caught, Fan Chu finally ran onto the car and looked at the woman outside who was unwilling. Fan Chu breathed a sigh of relief. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Village Mystery Cloud 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Village Mystery Cloud 1. Fan Chu was dressed in rags. After getting on the car, her body suddenly recovered and her lost backpack reappeared in her hand. Except for her clothes, everything was actually restored. Fan Chu got into his seat and found that the faces of the people on the bus were very unfamiliar. The only difference is that they are clean as new. Those people looked at Fan Chu with curiosity in their eyes, as if they couldn't understand why Fan Chu dressed up like this and rushed into the bus. Fan Chu sat in his seat, feeling a bit confused. Should he be stuck here all the time? She searched around with her head, but still couldn't see any trace of her roommates. Fan Chu no longer thought about it, her relaxed body was unusually tired, and she closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. I don't know how long it took, but with a sudden break, Fan Chu woke up from his sleep. At first, she opened her eyes vaguely, then looked around in disappointment and changed her gaze. She got up and followed everyone out of the car. And those new arrivals seemed to not understand their situation. Looking outside, they found a patch of yellow sand and complained. My friend said he gave us a surprise, and that's all he did. Yeah, this person who doesn't live in the village before and doesn't live in the store behind wants us to perform survival in the wilderness. After a boy finished speaking, everyone burst into laughter. A thug-headed boy walked forward and said, "Let's go, let me see what these people are up to." Everyone followed in order. A group of people got off the car in a dry land. Yellow sand covered the sky, surrounded by stone cliffs piled up with loess. Fan Chu carried a backpack and slowly walked through them, unable to open his eyes when the wind mixed with soil. After the crowd walked not far, Fan Chu saw a village in front of him, which looked even more desolate and dilapidated against the backdrop of loess. Everyone cautiously walked into this village, surrounded by a desolate atmosphere. Everyone dispersed and explored the environment around them. Fan Chu knocked on the door from door to door, but there was no response. After confirming that there was no one living in the village, he casually pushed open the doors of each household and walked in. The yard is overgrown with weeds. After entering the house, dust is flying in the air, moldy food is on the table, and the bedding on the bed emits a damp smell. Fan Chu heard everyone talking outside and walked out. We have seen that there is no one in this village, and it is surrounded by lus. There is only one village where the wind blows hard outside, but when we return to the village, there is no wind. Another boy wearing glasses took the conversation and continued. The air outside is foggy with the wind blowing, making it difficult to see the road clearly. For safety reasons, it's better to stay here and plan slowly. Everyone agreed and found the largest house in the village, then moved in. Fan Chu was not familiar with them, so he lived in one of his own rooms, while the remaining 2 or 3 people lived in one room. It was late at night, and after locking the door, Fan Chu lay in bed. Thinking of his future days of fear and anxiety, his heart was tormented. He tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Dong dong, dong dong, a hurried sound suddenly knocked on Fan Chu's door. A girl's voice came from outside, her words filled with panic and fear. Help me, open the door. That girl seems to be afraid of something coming over, and the more she knocks, the more urgent it becomes. Fan Chu looked at the door in confusion. There was glass on the door of the room, but it was covered with an old layer of newspaper. Nevertheless, Fan Chu could still see some shadows outside the window clearly. The girl who heard the sound should be at the door, but Fan Chu didn't see a figure through the newspaper, but the door kept banging. Everyone should be able to hear this movement, why hasn't anyone come out? Fan Chu felt something was wrong and decided it was better not to open the door. The girl outside the door didn't wait for Fan Chu to open the door for her for a long time. Her voice was filled with resentment and became even more mournful, and then she stopped abruptly as if something had pinched her throat. Fan Chu's mind constantly echoed with the girl's cries, and his hair stood up. Not long after, the people outside seemed to have given up, and a sound of footsteps gradually drifted away. Fan Chu felt relieved in his heart, thinking that the girl had already left. Fan Chu got up from bed and accidentally glanced over, only to see a pair of eyes through the glass on the window, their eyes rolling and staring straight into the room. Fan Chu was startled. The room was very dark, and Fan Chu quietly lay back in bed, covering his figure with a blanket, but his heart was beating really hard. I don't know how long it took, but Fan Chu didn't hear anything. He mustered the courage to look outside and found that the pair of eyes outside the window were gone, but he was still worried and didn't fall asleep all night. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Village Mystery Cloud 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Village Mystery Cloud 2. The next day. Fan Chu finally fell asleep in a daze, but outside came a noisy sound. Fan Chu pushed open the door and found a group of people gathered at the entrance of a certain room. Fan Chu walked towards the group of people in confusion. What happened? After seeing Fan Chu walking over, everyone's eyes unconsciously became estranged. The girl standing at the door looked at Fan Chu with a gloomy expression on her face, and then choked her throat. Are you satisfied? Last night you were inside the house but didn't open the door. Fortunately, I was lucky, otherwise I would have been lying here like my good friend. Fan Chu looked into the room and saw another girl lying stiffly on the ground with a fierce expression, her eyes wide open and full of fear. Fan Chu thought about what was wrong with last night and didn't argue anything with the girl. She looked at the expressions of those around her, their eyes mixed with a hint of blame, and some people avoided Fan Chu's gaze, extremely distant. Fan Chu was sarcastic in his heart, but he didn't say anything. He didn't even know how long he could live in this place, so why bother meddling? So he turned around and returned to the room. The others stood at the door comforting the girl, and on the first night, they lost a companion, leaving everyone feeling very depressed. Then he forced his smiling face and said, "Let's introduce ourselves. We didn't have time yesterday." The girl at the door forced a smile on her face and answered weakly, my name is Bai Ruru. The boy wearing glasses instinctively pushed his glasses open. My name is Su Yu. The middle-aged man also chuckled and said, my surname is Wang, my name is Jin Gui. After everyone introduced their names, they gathered on a table and took out some food from their backpacks to eat casually. Wang Jingui looked and everyone spoke up. Everyone doesn't know why they suddenly appeared here, otherwise they would go out and look around in the next few days to see any clues to leaving here. Everyone nodded in agreement. Bai Ruru next to her looked hesitantly at everyone. Do you want to call her along? Everyone understood who Bai Ruru was talking about in their hearts, but they all refused. Call her up, what if she treats us like a cushion in case of danger? Bai Ruru looked very helpless on her face, so she had to go out with everyone. Here, Fan Chu looked around the room and finally found a talisman in the corner of the bed. Fan Chu felt a little more at ease when she saw the talisman, and she didn't plan to go out and explore. She just needed to live through these 3 days and find the talisman to save her life. Fan Chu thought tonight would also be very dangerous, but it was calm and terrifying. Thinking that today was a dull day, Fan Chu was puzzled. It shouldn't be. Fan Chu murmured in a low voice, his eyelids suddenly became heavy, but he was not sleepy enough, and soon fell asleep. What Fan Chu didn't know was that after she fell asleep, a pair of eyes suddenly appeared on the window, staring straight at Fan Chu. Early in the morning on the 3rd day, the courtyard door was knocked on with a loud bang. Fan Chu heard a sound inside the room and opened the door, leaving the people in the courtyard standing at the door feeling lost. Finally, Bai Ruru walked out and opened the door. Outside the door stood an old lady with a smile on her face and a gentle gaze at Fan Chu and the others in the courtyard. Everyone looked at her in confusion. The lady didn't care at all about their eyes, just holding on to Bai Ruru's hand and warmly greeting them. How did you sleep last night? It's rare for young people to come to our village, but we must live in a delicious place. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Village Mystery Cloud 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Village Mystery Cloud 3 Fan Chu looked at the kind-looking lady at the door and Bai Ruru, who was also smiling, and felt that the smiles on their faces were very similar. Auntie said to everyone, yesterday I saw you get lost at the village entrance. My old man met you and brought you back to live here. Although this house has been left unused for a long time, it is the largest house in our village. I hope you don't mind. Listening to the lady's words, everyone fell into silence for a moment. They had been here for 2 days now, and when they first arrived nearby, they also checked and found no one. For a moment, no one answered Aunt's words. At this moment, Bai Ruru spoke up and said, we suddenly wandered here. Fortunately, madam, you are kind. Otherwise, we would have camped on the streets. How could we have despised you? The lady patted Bai Ruru's hand with satisfaction and said, if you don't mind, it's good. I just passed by to see you. If there's nothing else, I'll leave first. Bai Ruru smiled as she watched the lady leave and looked at the crowd. This village is not very safe. For our safety, we should follow them for now. We can't go out recently. Everyone nodded in agreement. In the afternoon, the village chief invited them to have dinner together in the evening. Everyone originally intended to refuse. Bai Ruru gave them a subtle glance, and when they saw it, everyone swallowed their refusal and agreed to the village chief's invitation. Upon hearing everyone's answers, the village chief's smile became even more sincere and he left satisfied. Fan Chu looked at the back of the village chief and turned to enter the house. It was so hot today, and the noon sun was too scorching. Fan Chu walked weakly in his own shadow. Remembering that the village chief had been standing under the sun for half a day just now, something suddenly occurred to Fan Chu. Her gaze shifted to her own shadow. Why didn't she see the shadow of the village chief? It was noon, but Fan Chu broke out in a cold sweat. No, I need to go out and take a look, in case I make a mistake. Speaking, Fan Chu turned around and walked out the door. The scenery outside is completely different from when they first arrived. The surroundings are no longer barren and dry land and abandoned buildings, but are surrounded by green waters and mountains, and the houses and buildings still have a poetic atmosphere. There are scattered villagers on the road, but most of them are sitting under the eaves chatting. How can we see their shadows? Fan Chu has made a mistake. At this moment, Fan Chu saw the lady at the door in the morning from afar. She pretended to be pleasantly surprised and walked forward to say hello. Auntie. The lady's expression was strange for a moment, as if she didn't expect Fan Chu to dare to come out alone. Then, a smile appeared on her face as she was about to say something. Fan Chu casually glanced at the ground, quickly withdrew his gaze, and then waved his hand at the lady. Goodbye, Auntie. The words that the aunt was about to say were stuck in her throat, unable to move up or down. Looking at Fan Chu's back, the aunt's angry teeth clenched. After Fan Chu walked away, the old lady no longer had a smile on her face and her eyes were gloomy as she stared ahead. Fan Chu's footsteps on the road were extremely fast, as if afraid of catching up, and he returned to the house in a few minutes. She closed the door with suspicion in her heart. She thought she had misread, but didn't expect that there was really no trace. So, the villagers in the entire village are not human. Fan Chu decided to stay indoors and not go to eat at night. The sky gradually darkened, and in a few hours, the bus should appear. Fan Chu held the amulet in his hand, feeling inexplicably uneasy. Fan Chu sat by the bed, for some reason. Tonight, she was sleepy earlier than usual. Fan Chu wanted to stay awake, but couldn't open her eyes. In the end, she collapsed heavily on the bed. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Village Mystery Cloud 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Village Mystery Cloud 4. When Fan Chu woke up again, he found himself lying on the table, with plates of delicious and tempting dishes in front of him. Fan Chu tried to remember why he was like this, but couldn't remember it. He only remembered that he and his companions had wandered here 2 days ago and met an old man at the village entrance who took them in. The villagers around saw Fan Chu wake up and warmly served her vegetables. Eat more, children. When you say I used to beg for a living, it doesn't make me feel good. After the villagers finished speaking this sentence, an additional memory came to Fan Chu's mind. I am from another village and only wandered here with my fellow villagers due to famine. Thanks to these kind-hearted people, Fan Chu looked at them with gratitude in his eyes. The villagers have been toasting among the crowd, and everyone is drunk. Fan Chu looked at the wine handed to him and instinctively refused. The villagers gathered around and asked Fan Chu to drink it. Fan Chu refused several times, and the villagers around them looked strange. They stopped their movements and stared at Fan Chu with a faint gaze. The scene suddenly fell silent. Fan Chu felt something was wrong in his heart and took a forced sip from the cup. The villagers saw this and smiled again, creating a lively atmosphere once again. After a while, Fan Chu felt dizzy and drowsy. She looked around, and everyone was lying unconscious on the table, while the villagers around her stood there sober, quietly watching them. After Fan Chu woke up again, it was the 4th day. Fan Chu felt like he had forgotten something important. At this moment, an old lady came in outside and saw Fan Chu waking up. She greeted her with a friendly smile. Arya, wake up and eat. Fan Chu felt it was not right, but he didn't know what was wrong, so he could only obediently wash his hands and eat. After finishing his meal, Fan Chu wanted to go out and take a walk. After leaving, Fan Chu walked on the road, and the villagers passing by warmly greeted him. Among them, Fan Chu also met several familiar faces. Fan Chu felt strange in his heart. Why did he feel familiar? Later on, thinking about it, everyone would surely be familiar with the same village. They reached out and knocked on their heads, feeling increasingly foolish. She happily returned home and saw her grandmother doing housework, very diligent in helping her. The old lady was also very happy, and the two of them were in a happy and harmonious scene. While sleeping at night, the talisman in Fan Chu's pocket fell out. Strange, where did I get this? Forget it, I don't think about it anymore. It must have been my grandmother who went to the temple to help me beg, maybe I forgot. Fan Chu planned to put it in his own pocket, hesitated for a moment, and by a stroke of luck, he hid it at the cuffs. Then lying in bed, satisfied and fell asleep. A few days passed peacefully like this, and one night, Fan Chu slept in a daze and heard some movement in the room. The window made a clattering sound, which was particularly clear in the quiet late night. Fan Chu was so sleepy that he didn't care and slept until the next day. On the third and the fourth day, there was more and more noise near the window. It seemed that something was coming in, which also woke Fan Chu from his sleep. Fan Chu was very scared in his heart, staring at the window and enduring all night. He went to find his grandmother early in the morning. "Grandma, is there anything unclean in my room that makes noise every night? I'm so scared." Grandma looked at Fan Chu with a gentle gaze and touched her head to comfort her. "It's okay, it's our mouse causing trouble. Arya used to hear it every night before." Fan Chu tilted his head in confusion and said, "Is that so? But I seem to have forgotten these things." Grandma looked at Fan Chu with a smile but remained silent. End of this chapter.